This is the Old Musician's Blog, number 81. What's interesting today is that yesterday, it's a pretty wide subject, but I'll have to circle around it to get into it a little bit. But yesterday, yesterday, when I was blogging away, I had decided to talk a little bit about the Bitcoin blockchain, Hashgraph, Tangle, distributed ledger, etc., topic. I mainly did that to for one particular reason, and that was not so much to talk about the blockchain, but because I had noticed that on one of my feeds, somebody who had been posting regularly about kind of relationship issues, I suppose, relative to them, had a health issue, and they had gone into detail about that issue that they've been having, and as well as filming some of the things that had happened to them during their progress in that area. And I'd found that my own self had been repelled by that, and though I didn't discontinue them from my feed, I did stop watching them so much for quite a while, until they kind of reverted back to their old self again, in my particular opinion. And because of that, I thought, well, I don't want to talk about these kinds of things, to put off my imaginary audience that I probably don't even have. So I'll talk about Bitcoin and blockchain instead. And I managed to stay on the subject pretty much, but I'd kind of wished that I talked about it as some of the time when Bitcoin was making its monumental rise up to 20,000, because at that point I had a great many opinions, as so many others did. What was interesting was that my feed on social media feeds, and I'm talking generally, from YouTube to Facebook to Pinterest to Twitter to Steemit, had videos of people who were talking about their health issues that day, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because it's almost as though it's part of the collective, and here I was, instead of acting on some collective instinct that may or may not have had any validity to it. There I was trying to create quality content, by staying on the subject of Bitcoin, blockchain, Hashgraph, Tangle, distributed ledger, Byzantine fault tolerant, etc., etc. Today I notice that it was interesting. My feed today, particularly the Facebook feed, which I know is being carefully curated these days, was full, I would say 9 out of 10, if not 19 out of 20, posts were all short videos that if they were narrated, they had subtitles so that you could see what the narration was without actually going into the video, and it would probably capture some of your attention by doing that. And it was so prevalent in my feed that I actually went to the feed section and looked at most recent, to see whether or not this was what was actually, being posted as a recent feed, or whether or not it was an anomaly of their curation and social engineering of my intellect. And whether these things belong to me and them, I really am unsure about that. So, though I called it my intellect, perhaps it's our intellect and our social media. And today, I watched a really quite interesting video on YouTube by Andreas Antonopoulos, who's one of the one of the early supporters and originators of the Bitcoin environment. And he talked a great deal about gentrification, and he drew the analogy of how neighborhoods that have artists and weird people in them, because they're inexpensive neighborhoods to live in, become the cool neighborhoods, and other people want to move in, and slowly this process of gentrification occur, and the cool people who made the neighborhood interesting to begin with all move out. And he drew several analogies of how this occurs in creative situations, and of course ended up with Bitcoin, because that's where the social media. Of course, he talked about how these things became carefully curated and gentrified environments, such as Facebook and the cool, or MySpace even, and how the cool people had moved out, and how children didn't want to be on Facebook because their parents were there. And surely, one of the few reasons for being there is because sort of everyone is there. It's become a kind of phone book of localized information, sprinkled with this socially engineered, carefully curated streams that they provide for us. And really, the cool people are moving on to the Steemits and the hopefully the social media environments that will be built on things on the environments such as EOS, or even the hash graph, once they find their or the Tangle environments, once they find their way of getting the transactions for no payment, or very small payments, so the microtransactions of gaming and social media can be performed, and the cool people. But what was interesting about Andreas Antonopoulos' talk is that he talked about how what is not realized as the corporate interests move into the blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency environments, they are attempting to gentrify it, but they can't control it, because once something goes to the blockchain, it's there, and anyone with the correct kind of viewer can look back in time and see what that is. And so for the first time, he postulated that the environment itself is owned by the initial people, artists, weird people, thinkers, inventors that created these environments, and so they cannot be shut down. They are indelibly linked, indelibly tattooed upon the surface of Earth information systems forevermore, evermore.